Many minds wanted vengeance after that tragic day. How were you able to convince them that violence wasn't the answer?
I wasn't able to project that message as well as I wanted to, but the idea made sense to me because I had only ever seen violence produce more violence. When a mind flips another mind off because they cut them off in traffic, the mind that cut the person off would only have their bad behavior validated by the middle finger. Welcome back to my personified mind,
where concepts are personified and molded into impressive main characters.
This is RJB,
and this is Fear.
Today we'll be exploring my biases surrounding Dissent.
That sounds like fun, RJ. But do you think you're ready for next week when we start diving into your research?
I think the process of exploring my biases was the insight I needed to make my research more effective.
To be honest, I feel like I can clearly see the thread that holds your values together.
Me too. It seems like I have a tightly knit value system sewn together by confusing feelings, complicated relationships, and alternate realities right in front of my eyes.
I was just talking about your daddy issues, but we can go with what you said.
Thanks, Fear.
So RJ, how was your vision of Dissent able to bore itself into your thick skull?
You always know exactly what to ask to inspire creativity, Fear. You already know I was a mama's boy, but that would be the antithesis of Dissent, right?
Well, you talked about it a little, but wasn't your first word no?
My first word was no, and I can only imagine that it was my first word because my mom used that word a lot while I was in the womb.
It almost seems like you were affectionately relating the word no to your mother. Do you think you just assumed that it was a term of endearment?
That would make a lot of sense, considering how much I looked up to her. She kind of raised me to respect authority. I did for a while, but I think I started to understand what no meant when I was old enough to understand who my father was.
Like I said, daddy issues.
Come on, Fear. We just started.
Hey, mine's always poked the bear. Why can't I poke back? How do you think your liberal use of the word no translated into Dissent?
No basically became my superpower when I told my mom that I didn't want to go to church anymore. At that point, I was already privy to Santa's existence, and I really didn't see the point in committing time to something imaginary and insubstantial. I had video games to play and TV to watch, and they were much more promising than the good intentions of another father figure.
See?
Damn it, Fear. Yes, you're right, but I feel like a lot of other beliefs started to spawn from my newfound lack of faith. I've never been a big fan of routine or tradition, and I think my relationship to routine and tradition equated to my unreliable relationship with men.
Tradition just feels like a grift, doesn't it? How did you deconstruct your morals and values to something more valuable?
Well, from what I can remember, from the end of middle school through high school, I was one of the most punk jocks amongst my peers.
Yikes. Were you more of a jock or a punk? Because it doesn't feel like you could have both equally.
I was definitely more of a punk, but because I was built for sports, I thought I had to be an athlete. I was a varsity athlete, I was good at what I did, but my heart really wasn't in it. I'm positive my coach knew my heart wasn't in it, because he never let me live it down.
It seems like you were really obsessed with being different. I understand if you didn't relate well to the other athletes, but did you always fit in with your punk group?
Not always, because I was kind of a square. I didn't drink and I didn't like to break the law.
That seems antithetical to being a punk, doesn't it?
It was, but I was very committed to respecting my mother's wishes. I found ways to fuck shit up without breaking the law, but I lost a lot of respect when I'd bow out because I was too worried about getting caught.
Well, you had been through a lot with your mother at that point. You can't have always done what your mother told you to do, did you?
Not always, but I was also a little traumatized by doing anything I wasn't supposed to because I'd always get caught. The night I got into that car accident that gave me serious head trauma was the night I didn't listen to my mother.
You really showed her.
Right? That car accident definitely changed my perspective on a lot of things. The year I came back from the hospital was the same year as 9/11. I had a new perspective on life. And because my story and my beliefs on the value of life, one of my teachers offered me the chance to give a speech in front of the school.
I love it that you went from being a shy wallflower to speaking in front of your entire school. What was your speech about?
I didn't want other minds to surrender to violence and hatred, so I gave a speech about rising above terrorist manipulation. I tried to impart the idea that the only way to overcome terror is to rise above it without violence to answer the violence.
Many minds wanted vengeance after that tragic day. How were you able to convince them that violence wasn't the answer?
I wasn't able to project that message as well as I wanted to, but the idea made sense to me because I had only ever seen violence produce more violence. When a mind flips another mind off because they cut them off in traffic, the mind that cut the person off would only have their bad behavior validated by the middle finger.
It seems like you wanted to find an answer, and not just a traditional response. How else did you attempt to defy social norms?
Well, when I went to college, I enjoyed breaking the mold by going to a lot of pimp hoe parties dressed as a hoe.
Interesting tangent, but I'll give you a chance to explain.
Yeah, it was getting a little dark there for a second, so I decided to take a hard turn. Being a big hairy guy that hated being a big hairy guy offered me the chance to mock the body I had adopted. I also loved making all the pimps at these parties squirm when I'd show them my whale tail and the cleavage I was able to create by pressing my pecs together.
You are so weird, and I love it. Did you dress in drag often?
Not as often as I wanted, but only because of my lack of confidence and the cost of makeovers. I did go out to a lot of parties, though, and the brain damage was paying off a lot because I was a cheap date.
Fair enough. But that lifestyle doesn't seem sustainable with your existing brain damage. Did your drinking life ever become a problem for you?
It did, in very destructive ways. I didn't really know who I was after the accident. The friends I had before the accident said that I had changed a lot after the accident, but I didn't really know what they meant. There was some amnesia from the brain damage, and I didn't have any reason to believe that I was different. The idea of being born again rang true. But my rebirth required me to grow up again and relearn everything.
That sounds tough, considering that you were in your junior year when this accident happened. That part of your life is extremely important for emotional development, and it sounds like you had to completely reimagine who you were. Do you think dressing in drag was a part of rediscovering yourself?
I think I was doubling down on what I could remember. One of my largest obstacles to continue my dissenting behavior was the PTSD and hypervigilance. I was deathly afraid of trying new things, so I drank a lot in college for the liquid courage.
Reliability seems like a huge obstacle at that point in your life while questioning everything, including your own reality.
It was a trip, and while I was in college, I was more interested in becoming something rather than becoming who I wanted to be. It was especially difficult for me to figure out who I was when I couldn't find a world where I could fit in. I desperately sought out relationships because that's one world that was still familiar to me.
You didn't really know how to be friends with women, and so you just pushed for relationships, right?
Unfortunately, I adopted that lifestyle again because of my addiction to dopamine. And when I wasn't in a relationship, I was drinking, and I usually drank to black out. A very destructive characteristic, I know, and it followed me into my early 30s.
What happened in your early 30s that helped you stop that destructive behavior?
Well, I had a chronic anxiety attack for 3 weeks straight while I was working a very steady job as a truck driver.
Dear God, how did chronic anxiety help you?
Basically the same way my deadbeat father helped me, by encouraging me to live without the toxic behaviors I had adopted from fleeing my feelings.
I think your emotions became a lot louder when you stopped drinking because of how we erupted from your subconscious like water from a kinked hose. How difficult was it to quit drinking?
Actually, not very hard at all because I was able to cut it off cold turkey. I looked at alcohol like my father, understanding that if I were to keep alcohol in my life any longer, I would only be allowing it to hurt me further. I consider myself a sober beer nerd because I still love the stories behind beer. I just don't drink it. Unfortunately, I found all my relationships and built my entire career within the alcohol industry.
When a traumatized mind becomes so overwhelmed by unfamiliar emotional language, it's important to become defensive for the sake of the mind's self-preservation. What are you doing now to manage your defensive behavior and irrational reactions?
Every day I find a new way to listen and pay attention to verbal, nonverbal communication. So many minds find dissenting communication to be confrontational, and it can be counterintuitive to try to mend bridges once they've already been burnt to cinders.
It's so true that nothing ever gets fixed when there's no incentive to fix it. What methods have you found to be effective?
I'm working on a method I consider to be aggressive peace. I know that sounds contradictory, but the way I choose to be peaceful definitely isn't passive. Active listening, addressing hyperbole, and finding reasoning for irrational outbursts is difficult, but effective. I don't like to assume that people mean what they say when they emotionally blow up. I don't like to get offended, and I attempt to do whatever I can to keep the conversation from going off the rails. Emotional outbursts are generally irrational, but they're usually rooted in rational interactions.
I completely agree, because when conversations become so disconnected from rationality, the structure of the argument is reduced to rubble by the ordinance of overly developed defenses.
That it does. I also like to actively listen with shit sandwiches, where I compassionately ask a question or thoughtfully reflect on a statement. I retort with my opinion, and then I show them my appreciation for participating with my narrative.
That kind of mentality helps a lot when there isn't any moderator. And I love the name because it's also a humorous way to diffuse tension. Some minds might read into your shit sandwiches as manipulative. How would you address their misinterpretation if it was ever to arise?
It's important to speak the same language, but I'm not talking about being able to speak a foreign dialect. Using big words or complex phrases can be interpreted as confrontational if the other mind doesn't understand. And just because the other mind doesn't know as many words doesn't mean they're not intelligent. Minds curate their vocabulary to mimic their culture, but that doesn't mean their insight isn't important if their culture doesn't speak every language. Like you said, calling someone stupid or being condescending will never be the solution.
For minds that feel overwhelmed by an unfamiliar vocabulary, how should they attempt to moderate their own conversation?
I often see minds running into arguments with guns blazing, hoping that one of their violent statements will take down their target. If you've ever seen Star Wars, the rebels wouldn't have been able to bring down the Death Star without discovering a weak point that was the size of a womp rat. Basically, if a mind finds themselves at a disadvantage in any situation, the best plan isn't to just go down with guns blazing. Learn the weak point of your boss, and manage your arsenal effectively to even the playing field.
That makes a lot of sense because it's like a parent scalding their child or a bully punishing their victim. The minds that abuse their power will only indoctrinate their victims into a reality that demands vengeance. What's your proposal for dissent that will effectively challenge oppression?
I want to help minds navigate the map of oppression by helping them be more prepared and informed. The reaction community is so hell-bent on capitalizing on the emotions of their viewer that sometimes minds will just lose their path. So many minds are working off survival, and minds in survival mode are vulnerable to distraction. It's important for creators to be thoughtful of emotions instead of taking advantage of them.
Unfortunately, I don't think you are going to be able to stop the maliciousness of all reaction content. How will you guide minds to avoid all the traps?
Asking the right questions and actively reflecting on emotional triggers is key. Asking for clarity is far more effective than asking for reasoning. In a world where minds are guided by emotions, and because most minds don't fully understand their emotions, asking a mind to clarify what they're trying to say will always be less confrontational. It's also important to never condescend, or call another mind stupid if the goal of the conversation is to find compromise.
Absolutely, RJ. The creators in the reaction community often push top-selling narratives because that's always the easiest way to capitalize on emotions. How do you think you will approach them?
I want to call out their dishonesty by reacting to reactions. There are so many irresponsible creators that selfishly create for money and clout. Analyzing their reasoning and dishonesty will be fun, because just like the government, there needs to be more checks and balances when so much collateral is at stake.
I love it. Is that what you hope to accomplish with all your content?
That, and I also want to realign the idea of dissent and rebellion. One of the most counterproductive strategies of rebellion is rebelling dishonestly. A rebellion for progress seems to be a distant memory, and the proliferation of explosions and loud noises seem to be the new narrative. Destruction is change, but tearing down a wall to loot small businesses is not the same as tearing down a wall to stop oppression. So many minds break the law to break the law, but if a mind is going to break the law for justice, at least make it meaningful and iconic.
I thought you didn't like violence.
I don't, but if I can paraphrase a quote of Dissent from V for Vendetta, any mind can be ended by a bullet, but a mind's ideas will live forever because they are bulletproof. If a mind is going to act on dissent, at least make the act so glorious that it's echoed through history. So many creators think that being edgy and loud is the same as Dissent, but most of those creators don't care about the message, just the money.
Very true. How will you define dishonesty in your reactions?
I'm going to find their uniquely profound messages and then compare that narrative to the rest of their rhetoric. I truly believe that there are a lot of creators out there who are actively attempting to manipulate the consumers.
I'm sure we can start by making those once a month, so that it's not too overwhelming. What will be your rubric for grading their inconsistencies?
There are a few concepts I've recently grown privy to called emotional hijacking and the priming paradigm. Emotional hijacking is defined by the manipulation of emotions to force a desired reaction, like coaxing a child into a van with free candy, or dishonestly reframing a mind's intentions to paint them as the villain. Emotional hijacking actively manipulates a mind's emotions to help push selfish narratives.
That's disgusting. Would go on.
Right? The priming paradigm's similar, but imagine a mind being strapped to a chair with each eye forced open with a speculum to see a series of words and phrases specifically curated for subliminal messaging. The priming paradigm isn't as ambiguous, because the creator will use words and phrases casually to prime consumers into an agreeable frame of mind with a forced perspective.
That shit is awful. Like when videos use the words destroyed and fail in all caps and excessive exclamation points in the description. I understand that they're trying to make the videos more attractive, and I know that you do it as well, but the shocking words don't often match the content at all. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I completely understand. I often use flashy words to be ironic, but I also use them in a way to highlight my appreciation for gallows humor. I just can't stand how attractive violent words are, and how they manipulate minds who seek justice. I understand that their desire for justice is disguised in the subconscious, but mine shouldn't be so attracted to bandwagons. Following the manipulative narrative of unironic, dishonest, violent behavior only emboldens oppression.
What do you mean when you say that violent behavior emboldens oppression?
Well, imagine a mind attacking a tank with a handgun, and expecting the tank to feel threatened. The tank, with the more objectively destructive weapon, has no reason to feel threatened. But now the tank has enough of a reason to respond with violence. The same goes for a rebellion protesting a government. Protesting an end boss, like a government, has to be done surgically. Protesting recklessly and rioting will only validate an end boss's need for oppression, and the end boss will often become even more oppressive. Violence for the sake of violence doesn't equal dissent. Violence is so old hat that the use of violence is just Pavlovian.
I completely agree, because the end boss usually uses me to defend itself, where the rebellion believes that they can use me to be aggressive.
Absolutely. If a mind is attacked and it survives, they usually arm themselves with more tools to defend themselves in the future. The surviving mind often starts misinterpreting unsafe situations because of self-preservation. The surviving mind also acts irrationally and can't be expected to think clearly when they think their mortality is at stake. Even the tank will respond this way, finding more effective ways to attack small targets. Because the tank most likely has more resources at its disposal, its response will usually become more definitive. Any mind with a more stable foundation will have the means to utilize their emotions to find more effective solutions.
So, RJ, how are you going to help minds fight oppression and find the weakness of the Death Star?
I want to help minds who are interacting with oppression by encouraging them to ask questions that demand definitive answers. Minds need to be more informed and surgical when attempting to change the minds of those in power, and those in power have to be held accountable. I'm not going to be doing anything illegal because I wouldn't be approving anything. A mind can break the law, or it can find a way around the law. I will research what history has done right to fight oppression by helping rebellious minds find more options and more effective methods.
I'm sure that will push some buttons, but I don't see anything wrong with what you're doing, especially if you cite your resources.
That will definitely be an important part of my research. I not only want dissenting minds to be more informed, but I want them to feel brave enough to use their resources. I would also love it if other creative minds would work with me to forge more pathways to freedom. Some ideas will be ineffective or impossible to navigate, and I can't assume to know everything. I've been out of the social scene for a long time now, but with every mind's permission, I'm going to make sure that the voice of every mind is heard. I want every mind to feel brave enough to believe that their ideas are important.
That sounds very interactive and insightful, RJ. So, what do you think your bias will look like in your research?
I think my relationship with my parents will push me over the obstacles I encountered because I did rebel against both of them.
I thought you were only rebelling against your father.
For the most part, but I started rebelling against my mother when I noticed she wasn't really helping herself by trying to control my life. I still love her, but she hasn't really had the chance to heal the wounds she adopted from chaos.
That makes a lot of sense because hurt people hurt people.
That was my thought process, considering that the script of my thought process was written by my relationship with empathy. My emotional reactions will definitely draw out my biases, but I really want to prove why emotions are rational.
With your PTSD, I think that it will be very important to be introspective. How do you think you will manage your emotions while interacting with creators who use a manipulative dialogue?
I'll attempt to call it out like I see it. I've been trying to use my hypervigilance as more of a superpower than something to suppress. There's a reason why my emotions are encouraging me to be overly critical at times, and I need to respect my emotions as a part of parts therapy.
Parts therapy is amazing. I felt seen once you started respecting my insight as a part of you.
I feel like that is one of my key dissenting behaviors, especially being defined my entire life as a man. I was always supposed to suppress my emotions because they made me seem weak. My bias surrounding feminism and individuality will truly guide my research by avoiding larger, toxic entities. The softer voices of smaller creators might need a megaphone, and I want to be able to provide that hardware.
Your approach to philanthropy is going to be very cool, RJ.
Thank you, Fear. My novel bias of dissent will also try to convince me that there is no such thing as an expert. It might be a conspiracy theory, but is change really real? Or is it just a consolation prize from our oppressors? It's probably more complicated than that. But it's important to always bargain with the oppressors when equality is at the table. They can always give more than they offer.
Preach, RJ. I'm excited to start a research of feminism and women's rights.
Me too, Fear. I think I want to start by highlighting one of my favorite female creators, Mikey from Glam and Gore. She is so insightful and creative. I want to react to her Final Girl series, and I can only hope that my reactions will be just as insightful as she is. Hopefully you will join in on my reactions, Fear, because your help has been invaluable.
I'll be there for you, RJ. Even you have to learn ventriloquism just to include me.
Why would I have to learn ventriloquism?
No reason, but always remember,
Be smarter than your brain?
and react responsibly.